The story below is based on Bernie Walton's prison diary before his death. Let's begin. I was born into an upper-class family in Washington. People often imagine that being born into a wealthy family, a silver spoon child, always entails a beautiful and privileged childhood, but my life defies that rule. My days of misery began with a habit where I often invited Salome, my close friend, to my mansion for the weekends. The resentment and outrage still linger in me whenever I think about her, someone I once called a friend. Salome, with her gentle and innocent appearance, never showed any signs of her greed. Perhaps that's why I find her even more repulsive. On the weekend, when I unexpectedly returned to my room after preparing some snacks for Salome, I was shocked by a scene I had never dared to imagine. Passing by my father's room, I noticed traces of Salome everywhere: scarves, a pair of black shoes tossed on the floor, and a familiar perfume scent. I rubbed my eyes several times to make sure I was not mistaken. Approaching the bedroom area, I discovered the most disgusting scene I had ever witnessed. My father was embracing Salome's waist with a look of joy, and what's more, he was kissing Salome. Salome saw me and gave a faint smile, her eyes devoid of any apology or embarrassment. I quietly left the room, filled with extreme hatred. However, for the sake of family happiness, I decided not to tell my mother about this vile secret of my father and secretly hired a gang to eliminate Salome as quickly as possible. Yet somehow all the journalists knew about my family's shameful story the very next morning. My father, a 60-year-old man, was having an affair with his daughter's best friend, a 19-year-old girl. My mother had a heart attack from the shock as soon as she heard the news. After receiving the news from the butler, I immediately returned home, but she had already breathed her last. However, what truly devastated me was that my mother's death was linked to Salome and my father. Salome herself told me that it was my father who had poisoned my mother's tea before she read the news of his affair. And all the secrets of my family were exposed because Salome had spoken to the journalists. Even more terrifying was her revelation that she was pregnant with my father's child. Everything happened so fast that I fell into depression and locked myself in my room for days afterwards. After many days of self-torment, I decided to keep the secret of my mother's death to protect my father. He was the only family I had left. Once again, I indulged the evil of my father. Just a month after my mother's death, Salome moved into our mansion as if to declare herself the new owner. Her presence not only altered the atmosphere, but also the arrangement and management of the house. Gradually, she seized control of my father, turning him from a strong leader into a mere shadow in his own home. Despite this, I couldn't deny Salome's strange charisma, which commanded respect from those around her. Throughout her pregnancy, Salome showed a particular concern for her health and nutrition. I silently observed and awaited my chance to execute my plan. I knew that someday Salome would pay for the crime she committed against my family. That moment came when I learned of her habit of drinking warm milk before bed. One typical evening, I stealthily prepared a special glass of milk for Salome. In the deserted kitchen, I retrieved a box I had hidden for days, containing a finger I had stolen from Salome's mother's grave. With a thrill of vengeance, I placed the finger in Salome's milk. From a hidden camera in Salome's room, I shivered with excitement as she drank the milk, unaware of its contents. After finishing the milk, she discovered the gift I had left in the glass. I had carefully adorned the finger with her late mother's wedding ring, making it unmistakable. Realizing whose finger it was, Salome screamed in horror. Unforeseen by me, she was so frightened that she slipped and fell out of a nearby window. Salome fell from the second-floor window, but surprisingly, she survived the horrific fall. Hospitalized in critical condition, she spent weeks recovering. However, when she awoke and returned to the mansion, I immediately noticed a bizarre change. Salome was no longer the woman I knew. She began reacting and gesturing very much like her late mother, adopting her mother's tone and habits. My father was abroad on business during this time and was completely unaware of these events. I remained puzzled about 𝐒𝐈𝐚e, despite our having been close friends for over 10 years. Things got even more confusing when 𝐒𝐈𝐚e suggested building a new cellar in the mansion for storing important family heirlooms, a wish she had previously expressed. Despite my suspicions, I agreed, partly out of curiosity to understand what was happening. The cellar was completed in a few weeks, and on the day 𝐒𝐈𝐚e was away, I decided to explore it. Dim lights illuminated the cold stone walls as I entered. In a secluded corner of the cellar, I found a locked iron door. Using a key from a bracelet 𝐒𝐈𝐚e often wore, I opened the door to a small room. Inside, I saw a glass coffin. Through the foggy glass, I glimpsed the peacefully lying body of a woman in a pristine white wedding dress. I trembled, realizing it was 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's mother's corpse. I couldn't fathom why 𝐒𝐈𝐚e would keep her mother's body in the house, especially with the wedding ring I had placed on the stolen finger used to terrorize her. Reflecting on 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's recent strange behavior, I initially thought they were psychological symptoms from the accident, but things were becoming clearer. Suddenly, I had a chilling thought that 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's mother had taken over her body to seek revenge on me for stealing her finger. Returning to my room, I concocted another plan to drive 𝐒𝐈𝐚e away. Knowing that both 𝐒𝐈𝐚e and her mother were terrified of mice, I wouldn't stop at merely locking 𝐒𝐈𝐚e in a room full of them. Reaching out to my old underworld contacts, I planned something even more outrageous. At the familiar casino, a place 𝐒𝐈𝐚e often visited. In the VIP room, I awaited the prey to fall into the trap I had prepared. Through the camera, as soon as 𝐒𝐈𝐚e entered the door, she was drugged by a group of unfamiliar thugs. In the operating room, the doctors I had arranged were ready for a new experiment. This was the final gift I wanted to give 𝐒𝐈𝐚e before her death, removing the child from her womb and replacing it with the dead rats I had found on the roadside. Sitting in the shadows of the operating room, all I could hear were the ominous sounds of machinery, like the whispers of death. 𝐒𝐈𝐚e, still dazed, lay motionless on the table. Doctors in white coats and masks entered, and under my command, they began the surgery. Each cut was quick and precise, yet brutally revealing the horrific display inside her body. A curtain was drawn aside, exposing a small tub filled with decaying rats, their skin wrinkled and bones white. As the surgery reached its climax, the loud suction machine roared. 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's belly was forcefully opened, and the unborn child was roughly lifted out. Instead, dead rats were carelessly stuffed inside her. 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's weak moans rose but were quickly drowned out by the sound of classical opera music. Blood began to paint dark red flows on the white-tiled floor of the operating room. The surgery was brilliantly completed. The doctors caressed the dead rats as if they were precious treasures before stitching 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's wound. However, upon seeing 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's child, I was utterly stunned. Nausea hit me instantly. You can search for images of a child poisoned by mercury to visualize her baby. It was twins, but the two bodies were conjoined. The newborn was ghastly pale and blue, its emaciated body covered in slime, indistinguishable as male or female. They cried out a few times and then fell unconscious like a monstrous deformity. I decided to leave a doctor behind, ordering him to separate the twins' bodies. Each part of the child was placed on either side of her. Everything was left in chaos, blood not cleaned, only traces of a brutal struggle visible. Watching 𝐒𝐈𝐚e writhing in a pool of blood after the anesthesia wore off, I could only smile with satisfaction at my masterpiece. Looking at the dazzling necklace around 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's neck, a relic from her mother, I still harbored a nagging thought. Was the soul inside 𝐒𝐈𝐚e's body her late mother? Reflecting on it, 𝐒𝐈𝐚e wasn't her biological daughter. She was just an orphan, adopted from a refugee camp. Snatching the necklace, I closely examined it. 𝐒𝐈𝐚e had never shown me the photo inside it. Opening the locket, I was utterly floored by the surprise. The story became even more intriguing as I uncovered yet another secret about 𝐒𝐈𝐚. Holding the necklace with a looming fear unsettling me, I drove straight to the Burning Sun apartment, another home that my mother had bought for me when I turned 16. Are you curious about the necklace, the true identity of 𝐒𝐈𝐚, 𝐒𝐈𝐚's deformed children, or the soul inside 𝐒𝐈𝐚's body? These mysteries will be revealed in the next video. The day after the surgery, I received news about 𝐒𝐈𝐚's condition from the doctor. She was still alive. I genuinely doubted whether she was still a living being or just a corpse possessed by a spirit. Her abdomen was severely decayed due to harboring dead rats for too long. 𝐒𝐈𝐚 would never be able to have children again, and the pain and psychological damage from this event left a big shock in her mind. After discovering the loss of her child, 𝐒𝐈𝐚's condition was not much different from that of a mentally disturbed person. By noon, my father had hurried to the apartment where I was staying. We always understand each other clearly. He knew everything just by one look. In front of his gaze, I dropped my frivolous attitude and confessed that I was the perpetrator of the surgery. Although my father was deeply saddened, he also harbored an indescribable rage. I knew he could not bring himself to take his child to court because, after all, I was still his flesh and blood. After a long debate, I compromised with my father by agreeing to go to a boarding school on the coast during the summer break. Only a fool would believe that my father was sending me there just to study. This school was notorious for its harsh lessons designed to discipline rebellious children. There were rumors that some kids had even committed suicide due to the torture they endured there. Under my father's oppression, I was escorted to the school that very day. At the secluded boarding school perched on the cliff overlooking the sea, I was taken to a separate area for students who needed special attention regarding discipline. On my first day at school, while other students had retreated to their rooms, I climbed up to the attic, a place abandoned and rumored to be haunted. Sneaking step by step with the hope of exploring my new home, I actually met a stranger. He introduced himself as Gregory, and it seemed that my new friend didn't take much care of himself, as his hair was always unkempt, his clothes smelled foul, and he had a wild look in his eyes like that of vultures. Gregory seemed to know a lot about the school's loopholes and how to make things more interesting. He whispered about a terrifying plan that he and his friends had once executed, which forced the school's teachers to send them home. However, they were still sent back to school after a while. Gregory said he had once ground up the principal's beloved birds and added them to the school's stew pot. According to Gregory, the principal had a heart attack when he discovered the truth, and what Gregory particularly enjoyed was seeing the look of satisfaction on his face as he ate the soup, unaware of what had happened. Whether true or not, Gregory had awakened the darkest part of me. I began planning frightening actions with the hope of being sent home. Part of me felt as if I were being hypnotized by some force, driving me to act without thinking about the consequences. Each night we would perform a new prank, each time more audacious than the last. But after every prank, Gregory would disappear, leaving me to face the consequences alone. However, fortunately, the teachers always feared the Walton family's status, so they always overlooked my antics as those of a madman. Impatient with these nonsensical pranks that still had no outcome, I decided to revive the most horrific plans I had ever made. I came up with a thought. If I didn't want to study, I just needed there to be no more teachers in the school. Through talking to a few classmates, I learned that there was a student in my class who had contracted AIDS. Coincidentally, his name was also 𝐒𝐈𝐚. This name further provoked the cold blood in me. A new idea immediately surfaced in my head. As the clock struck midnight, my plan began. Taking a knife I had stolen from the kitchen, along with Gregory, we slowly approached 𝐒𝐈𝐚's bedroom. With just a gentle slash, Gregory pierced 𝐒𝐈𝐚's eyes, while I quickly covered her mouth as best as I could. I hated seeing the eyes of the innocent, so I wanted 𝐒𝐈𝐚 to be blind forever. After extracting enough blood from 𝐒𝐈𝐚, we left her trembling body on the bed. Entering the secret path behind the walls, I could only hear 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐚's painful screams and the hasty footsteps of the teachers. But I quite enjoyed these sounds, soothing like the piano music that old friend 𝐒𝐨𝐴 used to play for me. 𝐒𝐨𝐴 was taken to the hospital that night. Watching from the bedroom window, I felt she deserved it for bearing the name 𝐒𝐨𝐴. Taking 𝐒𝐨𝐴's blood was just the beginning. My plan still had a crucial phase left. The next morning, I and Gregory sneaked into the ventilation ducts, the cold metal making me shiver, but the excitement kept me going. Beside me, Gregory muttered something about revenge and perverted justice. We carefully opened the manhole cover over the kitchen and poured 𝐒𝐨𝐴's blood into the boiling soup below. The sound of boiling water mixed with Gregory's sneering laugh, like a grand scheme about to be fulfilled. Using the excuse of a stomach ache, both Gregory and I left the dining hall simultaneously before the meal began. Through the door crack, watching the teachers and my foolish friends tasting the soup one spoonful at a time, I burst into uncontrolled laughter. We waited for half a month, and the disease slowly spread through the entire school community, excluding Gregory and me. I approached the principal's office, proposing a comprehensive health check with the excuse of fearing that those around me might carry diseases that could be transmitted to me. To persuade the principal, I offered to cover all the costs. As expected, she agreed immediately. The purpose of this health check was for them to discover the disease I had meticulously orchestrated for them. I must admit that the response at the school was swift and immediate. As soon as the health results came out, news that the entire teaching staff and more than half of the students tested positive for HIV spread throughout the school like wildfire. The principal, who had already been hospitalized for a heart attack after the incident with the human bone stew, nearly suffered a stroke upon hearing the news. The school was thrown into panic, and everyone's attention turned to 𝐒𝐨𝐴, suspecting her to be the source of the infection. I was quite surprised by 𝐒𝐨𝐴's attitude at that time. She did not defend herself at all. It was as if she was used to enduring such criticism and had become accustomed to it. Local authorities and health agencies were called in to investigate, leading to the temporary closure of the school. Ambulances and police cars filled the school's entrance, creating an unprecedented chaotic scene. While everyone around me was scared and confused, I felt a deep thrill knowing I had caused this. It was a strange, intoxicating feeling, a supreme satisfaction knowing that I had the power to control the emotions of so many people. As soon as the decision was made to return home, I invited Gregory to stay at my mansion for a few days. Although we were still under strict supervision by my father, I felt much more comfortable than being confined at school. My father seemed to realize that the incident at my school was not random, but he remained silent about it. Gregory was the only one I could confide in. He was always there for me, supporting me during my loneliest moments. I grew to have special feelings for him, beyond just friendship. We spent many hours in my room discussing plans and future pranks. However, my father often complained that he heard me talking to myself. Initially, I did not understand why my father said this, as it was clear I always had Gregory by my side. My father's words became more persistent and annoying. He frequently stood outside my room door, looking in with a worried expression, asking whom I was talking to. I always pointed to the corner of the room where Gregory sat, but my father said he only saw a space. Confronted with my father's words, I decided to uncover the truth. I took Gregory to see a psychologist that my father had arranged. Throughout the conversation, as I was describing our talks, the psychologist continually took notes and followed my gaze. Finally, with a serious expression, he concluded, "There was no Gregory here. It was just my imagination." This explanation felt like a direct blow to my mind. Gradually, I realized that Gregory had never changed his appearance, never ate or changed clothes. The doctor explained that in my mind, I had created Gregory as a way to cope with the loneliness and immense pressure I had been enduring. Accepting this reality was incredibly difficult. I felt betrayed, not only by those around me, but also by myself. I gradually fell into a semi-psychotic state, losing direction and unsure of what to believe. Before 𝐒𝐨𝐜𝐚 could recover and return home, I sought psychological treatment for a year abroad. The story will continue in the upcoming video. The secrets and the final outcomes for 𝐒𝐨𝐚, my father and myself, will all be revealed in the next part.